Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Anil Batra, and along with me is Dr. Sandeep Sinha. I hope we are audible to all of you. So today we'll be presenting discussion regarding the abdominal distension in neonates. So I'll be discussing about some cases, some interesting cases which we encountered over the last few months, and Dr. Sandeep would be discussing about an approach to abdominal distension. So first case is baby M. This baby presented to us on day 7th of life. The baby had complaints of poor oral intake, and the baby had abdominal distension and vomiting since day 3rd of life. The vitals of the baby were stable at the time of admission, and on examination, the baby had abdominal distension along with decreased bowel sounds. So when we inquired regarding the history, the parents gave the history that the baby was passing small amount of stools since birth, but the baby was not having proper feed intake, and the baby started having vomiting since day 3rd of life. So we admitted the baby, we started the baby on IV fluids, and we made the baby NPO. The baby had significant bilious aspirates. On an X-ray which was done on the day of admissions showed dilated small bowel loops. There was no gas which was seen in the pelvic region. So a diagnosis of some obstruction was made. The baby was taken up by surgery by a surgeon, and it was a case of ileal atresia type 3B when recession anastomosis was done. And the post-operative period, the baby remained uneventful, and the baby was discharged after starting feeds. So a similar case presented to us 1 month back. In this baby, the case was diagnosed antenatally. So on antenatal scan, there were multiple fluid-filled bowel loops which were seen. And after vaginal delivery, the baby had distension at the time of birth. And when we aspirated, there was 35 ml of bilious aspirates. So on X-ray, we saw that there were multiple air fluid levels. On laparotomy, again, there was type 1 ileal atresia. Again, RA was done and the baby was recovered in 5 to 7 days. So just to stress the fact that ileal atresia, they are quite common in the neonatal period. They usually present in the first few days of birth. They can present from immediately after birth and up to 5 to 7 days of birth. They can be diagnosed antenatally by this proximal distended bowel with absence of distant bowel gas. And the neonate is usually not sick looking because the baby is not having any features of sepsis. Unless the baby has prolonged obstruction and dehydration, then baby can present with features of shock or dehydration. The prognosis is very good, and whenever such a patient has to be referred, we should refer this patient with an orogastric tube in situ and IV fluids to prevent vomiting and aspiration, and so that the baby has got no dehydration during the transport. Coming to the next case, this baby was admitted in the NICU on day 3rd of life. The baby had vomiting since day 1st of admission, and the baby developed distension on the first day itself. The X-ray which was done on 2nd day of life at the referring hospital revealed football sign. There was gas in the diaphragm on both the sides. The baby was admitted, made NPO, started on IV fluids. During the at the intraoperative time, the baby had cecal perforation, and the characteristic thing that we noticed at the time of surgery was the surgeon noticed that the baby had presence of meconium in the large intestine and rectum, and for that the suspicion of Hirschsprung's disease was there. So a colostomy was done and biopsy was taken from multiple sites. There were absence of ganglion cells in the rectum and ectosigmoid area, so a diagnosis of Hirschsprung's disease was made. So Hirschsprung's disease can have variable presentations. It can present immediately after birth, and it can present up to even later on during the childhood and even till adults. So the next is again a very interesting case. The baby was admitted to us at 1.5 months of age. The baby had distension along with constipation since birth, and baby also had intermittent episodes of some amount of vomiting, and the baby did not gain any weight since the last 1 month. The baby was evaluated for that previously twice. The baby was admitted twice. So an enema which was done outside barium enema, it was normal, and an upper GI contrast study was done to rule out any malrotation. That was also normal. The ultrasound abdomen was done, which was normal. So baby admitted on 1.5 months of age. The baby was admitted with dehydration. There was gross abdominal distension. There were absent bowel sounds. The plain X-ray which was done, which revealed dilated large intestine, and the baby with sepsis screen was sent and antibiotics were started. Frequent rectal washes were given, and when a dye study was done after the infection subsided, the barium enema was done. It revealed dilated bowel loops, the sigmoid colon, the transverse colon, and even the ascending colon above the cecum was grossly dilated. So there was a cutoff sign which was present, so a diagnosis of Hirschsprung's disease was made. The baby was taken up for surgery. So this baby presented at 1.5 months of age with enterocolitis. So up to 10% of Hirschsprung's they can present as enterocolitis in the first few months of life. So Hirschsprung's disease is the most common cause of distension in full-term neonates. The prenatal diagnosis is slightly uncommon, but we can see the fetal medicine people, they can see colonic dilatation on antenatal scans. The age of presentation is very variable. The children usually present, newborns usually present with bilious vomiting, distension, poor weaning, and failure to thrive. Characteristic is on rectal examination, explosive stool comes out, and 10% of them, as I mentioned, can present with enterocolitis. Contrast examination is diagnostic in 80% of the cases. We can see a rectum with a smaller diameter than the sigmoid colon. A transition zone is usually seen, and the diagnostic thing is once we give an enema, the dye does not evacuate completely even on a 24 hours delayed film. Next group of syndromes which usually present in the first few days of life is meconium syndromes. Meconium syndromes, they can present either as a meconium ileus or meconium plug syndrome or as meconium peritonitis. Meconium peritonitis usually occurs if during the intrauterine period the bowel it ruptures and there is bowel perforation. Coming to meconium ileus presents usually associated with cystic fibrosis, and there is hyperviscosity of the mucosal cell secretion which leads to the formation of tar-like meconium which is very thick. It leads to obstruction of the small intestine. It presents in the first 24 to 48 hours of birth as abdominal distension, and the baby is not able to pass stools, and there is bilious vomiting. On X-ray, there is soap bubble appearance, which is the presence of air in the meconium. It can progress to volvulus, then necrosis and perforation in extreme circumstances. If there's obstruction, if this leads to antenatal perforation, it can lead to pseudocyst formation with calcification. The diagnosis is again made by a contrast enema where we can see microcolon with small rabbit-like meconium concretions which are seen proximally in the small intestine. It is managed by rehydration, by gastric decompression and IV antibiotics. Enema is used with which got a success rate of 50%, but however, risk of perforation always remains. Alternative treatments, it include enterostomy and irrigating the bowel with 2 to 4% N-acetylcysteine, which liquefies the meconium and leads to easy dissolution of the meconium. Meconium plug syndrome is an entity which is seen in preterm neonates and infant of diabetic mothers. The reason for meconium plug syndrome is postulated to be hypermagnesemia and hypoglycemia. Because of hypermagnesemia, there is decreased motility, which leads to plugging of the meconium. Presentation is again the same with the distension of abdomen with minimal passage of meconium. However, in this case, the meconium plugs, they are accumulated in the large left descending colon. X-ray will again show multiple dilated bowel loops, and on giving water-soluble contrast medium like gastrografin, the meconium usually gets evacuated. But we should evaluate these patients for cystic fibrosis and Hirschsprung's disease because they can coexist along with meconium plug syndrome. So this is a picture of a meconium plug which was present in a baby who was delivered at 35 weeks, and the baby was not passing stools. On giving washes, we could evacuate the meconium plug from the anal opening. So after these case discussions, we can just go through the causes of abdominal distension. The distension, sometimes the distension can be physiological. If the baby cries excessively, we can see the baby's tummy is gaseously distended, but the baby is otherwise normal. Then the Cause of distension could be distal bowel obstruction. It could happen due to bowel ischemia or due to collection of various fluids or air or various masses which are present in the abdomen or the flanks. So if the distension is due to excessive crying, it usually subsides on its own. It is usually seen in term babies. It is usually transient and the baby is clinically otherwise well. And it usually occurs once the baby is around 3 to 4 weeks of age. It doesn't present in the first few days of life. Distal bowel obstruction we have already discussed. It is usually due to atrasias or Hirschsprung's disease, or sometimes meconium syndromes. They can present as obstruction and distension of the abdomen. Important entities, the bowel distension due to ischemia, which is one of the commonest things which we see in preterm newborns. The common things which present in the preterm newborns are two entities. One is necrotizing enterocolitis, and the other one is spontaneous intestinal perforation. Other things like midgut volvulus, incarcerated hernias, or segmental volvulus, they are slightly rare and then they usually present not that frequently. Necrotizing enterocolitis, all of us have seen, and it usually affects preterm newborns. The characteristic thing is it doesn't occur before 28 weeks. It usually occurs after 28 to 33 weeks, and the newborn is clinically very sick, and we can see signs of inflammation, which is associated with distension, periumbilical edema. Presence of bloody stools might not be present, but there can be presence of bloody stools usually points towards the presence of an inflammation or necrotizing process which is going on in the small intestine. The characteristic findings are pneumatosis intestinosus, that is the presence of gas in the bowel wall, or the presence of portal gas in the portal vein. In advanced stages, that is stage 3, we can see free intraperitoneal air or distended and fixed loops of bowel, and a gasless abdomen can be seen. So how can we differentiate it from other things which usually presents with the pneumoperitoneum? Spontaneous intestinal perforation is an entity which is seen in very preterm newborns, in which there is perforation in the gastrointestinal tract of a newborn who has got no identifiable reasons. There is a preterm newborn who is otherwise healthy, without any significant signs and symptoms of sepsis, and that can develop spontaneous intestinal perforation. It usually occurs in the terminal ileum or the transverse or the descending colon in the large intestine, whereas the necrotizing enterocolitis can occur involve any part of the intestine, usually the small intestine. It can occur usually due to stress, hypoxemia, or shock, and it occurs in approximately 1% of very low birth weight and 7% of extremely low birth weight infants. So, what's the treatment for that? So, some of the conservative people, they just do not do anything and wait for the perforation to heal, and assuming that it will be a sterile perforation. But other apart from surgical interventions, primary peritoneal drainage, like putting in a drainage tube in the abdomen just to decompress the abdomen and just to buy time, sometimes the perforation it heals spontaneously and we can avoid a surgery. In extreme circumstances, if the perforation is not getting healed, then surgery needs to be done. Midgut volvulus rarely presents as distension. It usually presents as a bilious vomiting, or the baby is not able to digest the milk and the baby is continuously vomiting. Plain X-ray will show signs of upper GI obstruction in the form of the features of duodenal obstructions like double bubble appearance. Upper GI Dike study is diagnostic. It will reveal the malrotation, characteristic signs and symptoms. And ultrasonography, it can help us to determine the orientation of superior mesenteric vessels. So rarer causes of abdominal distension in newborns could be hydrops. Hydrops can be immune or non-immune. In case of Rh isoimmunization and or OA OB isoimmunization, the way may be hydropic where the distension can be there, or non-immune hydrops can occur due to various GI causes or cystic hygromas, large lymphangiectasias. They can present as hydrops. Then pneumoperitoneum, again due to NEC, can present as large air collections. Abdominal, we should always look for abdominal masses whenever we're looking at the baby's abdomen. The renal masses are most common because presence of large kidneys due to the either vesicoureteric reflux or because of hydroureter nephrosis or multicystic kidneys, they can present as abdominal distension. Then rare causes like neuroblastoma, hepatoblastoma, and cholelitic cyst, they should also be kept in mind. It's at the same time, I would like to point out that instead of doing a plain X-ray, a horizontal X-ray film is much more informative as far as looking for various parameters in the newborns are concerned. Lateral decubitus X-ray, the left lateral film will let us know about the presence of free intraperitoneal air, presence of air fluid levels, rectal or colonic air, fixed bowel loops which are present in the stage 2 and 3 of NEC can be easily diagnosed if we do a lateral decubitus X-ray. They are difficult to make out on an AP or an AF view. Also, pneumatosis can be either a normal due to the stools or it can be due to the presence of air in NEC. So a little decubitus film can help us differentiate whether pneumatosis is due to the stools or because of the presence of air in the bowel wall. Then the size of duodenum is also more easily appreciated in a lateral decubitus X-ray. So whenever we are dealing with a case of obstruction, these are the common things which we need to ask in all the patients. About the gestational age to know whether, because NEC is more common in preterm babies, the chronological age because NEC presents later on in extremely preterm babies, and atrasias and Hirschsprungs usually present after the first few days of life. Presence of blood in the stools, the color of the stools, then presence of vomiting. Bilious aspirate is always pathognomic of malnutrition or duodenal atresia unless proved otherwise. Abdominal tenderness, look for the redness of the skin, and signs of sepsis because in India, whenever we are dealing with distension in a sick baby without any other features, septicemia comes first, should come first in the mind, and look for signs of sepsis, evaluate for septicemia, and look for platelet count to look for thrombocytopenia. So if we decide to evaluate a case of abdominal distension, if the baby is term and stable, the chances are that we'll be dealing with either a Hirschsprung's or an atrasias or meconium ileus. If a term baby is sick, then think of sepsis and necrotizing enterocolitis rarely, especially if the baby is having some cardiac conditions, because only 10% of the NEC cases are usually term. If the baby is preterm and stable, then we should look for meconium plugs, Hirschsprung's disease, and atrasias. And if the baby is preterm and sick, then again possibility of septicemia should be kept, and necrotizing enterocolitis should always be on high in the mind. Thank you. Dr. Sandeep will now take over from me, and in the last we can take over the questions, if any. Yeah.
So good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Anil, for making my work easier. So Dr. Anil had discussed with you almost all the aspect of abdominal distension in the unit. My role as a surgeon is to give an idea what goes inside our mind whenever we get a call for abdominal distension, and that too in a neonate, the surgical thought process, and how we reach the diagnosis in these newborn. We are almost always caused whenever either the child has developed abdominal distension or the child has some antenatal diagnosis, either atresia or even nowadays with the improvement of radiology, antenatal scans, more and more of distension of intestine, dilated loops are being picked up by the radiologist. So we are called that although the child has born, but there is no distensor, there is no distended loop. So what to do in these clinical scenarios? So two times at which we as surgeons are called in the neonatal ICUs of almost all the hospitals. The questions which we need to answer is there a surgical cause? If yes, how to confirm it? If no, again, how to confirm it that it is not a surgical cause? Because the surgical decisions had to be made upon certain hard facts. It cannot be based upon soft science, and that's why we need certain hard science. We need certain hard features based upon which we decide what is the final diagnosis, whether to take the child for the surgical intervention or not, or we need to conservatively manage the child. Remember, appropriate intervention and at appropriate time can save the life of the child. On the other hand, inappropriate intervention, whether surgical or even not operating a child at appropriate time, can also have long-term morbidity and mortality. And that's why this confirmation, whether the child needs surgery or not, is very, very important for us as a surgeon and also for the pediatrician or also for the child. So at distension, our approach, one of the approaches can be think about system-wise, whether the distension is because of gastrointestinal tract and the parts of the GI tract we all know, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Apart from that, hepatobiliary system can be the other causes of distension in a small tract. But if we analyze the situation, the renal causes, the renal lump can also present with abdominal distension and neonate. Many times we have got a call that there is a distension and it was a large urinary bladder. In fact, bladder can be a very important cause of lump in the abdomen of the child, which may lead to some form of distension. Then there are retroperitoneal masses which can lead to abdominal distension in the neonate. But again, if you see our neonatology colleagues almost always with the antenatal scans and the postnatal ultrasound, they should be and then almost always able to pick up whether the renal or the retroperitoneal cause of mass abdomen is there or not. So in the end, the only thing left is GI tract, the GI system, for which we as surgeons are called for looking at the cause and how to approach this situation. Dr. Anil has earlier enumerated all the cause, but what I want to emphasize here is that our thought process, the pediatric surgeon's thought process, that check whether the obstruction is high obstruction or low obstruction. High obstruction means the obstruction in the proximal part of the intestine. Common sense, the more proximal is the obstruction, less will be the distension, more the chances of vomiting. On the other hand, distal intestinal obstruction, low obstruction, there will be more of distension but less of vomiting. So there will be certain important history based upon which to predict whether there is a high obstructive lesions and low obstructive lesions. It is important for us to differentiate these two thought process, these two causes, because one disease which is known as malrotation with volvulus, life-threatening complication, life-threatening cause of high obstructive lesion for which early, immediate surgical intervention is needed. On the other hand, for almost all the other causes of distension of the intestine, neonatal intestinal obstruction, you can always wait for 24 to 48 hours without any problems, without any complications. On the other hand, malrotation with volvulus, immediate urgent surgical intervention will be needed. So the question we ask in our mind and also asked from the NICU colleague is that, is the baby vomiting and what is the color? Bilious vomiting is always a danger sign suggestive of proximal intestinal obstruction. Was an aerogastric tube passed? If so, how much fluid was drained from the stomach? Just after birth, suppose 30 to 40 ml or 50 ml of bilious drainage for all practical purposes. Think about atresia. distended loops of intestine, there is accumulation of bile proximal to the obstruction, and that leads to those findings in the atresia. Obviously, color will be bilious or non-bilious. Has the baby passed meconium and or the transitional stools? Delayed passage of meconium. As a surgeon, we always think of Hirschsprung disease, about which Dr. Anil had discussed with you earlier. Was abdominal normal at birth, and there is progressive abdominal distension. Very important history. Remember, the newborn with intestinal obstruction problem in the intestine will never have distension of abdomen at the time of birth. After birth, when the child will cry, the air will enter the abdominal cavity, and that air will lead to progressive abdominal distension in the neonate. And this is a very important history by which we predict whether there is an obstruction or not. And then we look at the abdomen, whether it is flat or distended, it is soft or tenderness or redness is there or not, is there any palpable mass or any visible loops of intestine over the abdomen or not. And then we look for the signs of sepsis, signs of illness, irritability, temperature, instability. All of these will suggest sepsis, because sepsis can also lead to paralytic ileus and distension of the intestine. And last but not the least, examination of the baby perineum is very important, because anal stenosis and anorectal malformation can also present with distension of abdomen in the neonate. And the first investigation, as the Dr. Anil has discussed with you, is the plain X-ray of the abdomen. And remember, very simple, most of the children with proximal intestinal obstruction, the plain X-ray of the abdomen is diagnostic. Double bubble, triple bubble, all of these signs we have read and we have seen in our clinical practice. Intraperitoneal calcifications suggest perforation, the intrauterine perforation with meconium ileus. Whole loops of intestine filled with air. Think in terms of Hirschsprung disease. Bubble is appearing as stool, suggestive of meconium ileus or cystic fibrosis, although it is rare in the Indian subcontinent. And as I've told you, air is a very good contrast agent in newborn. There is no need of addition of any upper contrast agent, because at the time of birth, the air will enter, and that can beautifully show the proximal intestine and the level of obstruction in the children. So, obstruction, whenever we thought, our thought process is, we ask for a plain X-ray and check whether it is a high obstruction or low obstruction. If the child has high obstruction or suspicion of malrotation, or if the plain X-ray is not diagnostic, then only we offer for upper GI contrast, in which gastrografin is added, and depending upon the findings, surgical or the medical management. On the other hand, low obstruction, one addition is the contrast enema. I will show you the photographs later on. That will suggest what is whether the diagnosis is a surgical diagnosis or medical diagnosis in these newborns. So, but whatever with the diagnosis, the management, initial management, pre-operative management is same. Make the child nil for oral, extract intravenous fluid, monitor serum sodium, potassium, urine output and weight, place a nasogastric tube and measure the output of the nasogastric tube. Start antibiotics if you are suspecting sepsis, for example. Piperacillin tazobactam is a good choice, and send hemogram, that is CBC, CRP, KFT, and maybe blood grouping and blood for grouping and cross matching. If the child is very sick, VBG and other investigation may also be needed depending on the clinical scenario of the child. So, just to give an idea, proximal and the distal intestinal obstruction. See the photograph in the right upper quadrant, visible intestinal lobe, few lobes of intestine visible over the abdomen. This for the child with ideal atresia, and the roadside showing you bilious vomiting in the nasogastric tube, double bubble, triple bubble, and proximal intestinal lobe dilated by CAF, contrast agent, and obviously that means the child has either duodenal, jejunal, or the ileal atresia. On the other hand, distended abdomen, more dilated lobes of intestine. Think of distal obstruction. Think of problem at the level of ileum or the ascending or transverse or the descending or the sigmoid colon. So coming to the distal intestinal obstruction, see the visible lobe, left side, visible lobe, X-ray, whole of the intestine is filled with gas. There is no free air fluid levels. There is no free gas in the diaphragm. Think of colonic obstruction. Think of Hirschsprung disease as an important cause of that colonic obstruction. On the other hand, right side, same distances, but you can see there are no visible lobe. Whole of the intestine is distended. That means the intestinal loops of intestine, dilated loops of intestine are not the cause of distension. And if you see the X-ray, football sign, the free gas under the peritoneal cavity, suggestive of perforation. And that's why that's how clinically also we can predict whether the child is having obstruction or because of perforation or some other reason there is distension of the intestine. Always examine the perineum. This child with distended abdomen, and if you examine the perineum, the anal orifice was not there, and that had led to progressive, slow distension of abdomen in this new child. The contrast enema, remember, we are never using barium in these contrast enema. We always use gastrographin or urographin to identify the area of obstruction, or many times it is therapeutic also for situations, for example, meconium plug or the meconium ileus, about which Dr. Anil has told you earlier. Microcolon can be found, which is important finding seen in ileoatresia, meconium ileus, or long segment Hirschsprung disease. So sequentially, if the child is suspicious of large intestinal obstruction, get the lower GI contrast enema, never with barium but with gastrographin, and you can see the microcolon in the left and the middle picture, or I can see the plugs of meconium in the right side photograph suggestive of meconium ileus. On the other hand, the other two X-rays are suggestive of microcolon, which may be because of ileoatresia or maybe because of the other causes which I have enumerated. And then, as shown by Dr. Anil also, the meconium plus gastrographic enema can be therapeutic also. That is a hyperosmolar agent. That agent pulls out water from the intestine and dilutes the content inside the intestine. So common sense, if you are giving gastrographin enema, you must hydrate the child properly, because the meconium will be diluted. The child may go into dehydration or hypovolemia if appropriate fluids has not been given to these children. And then perforation, I have told you, most of the time we go for early immediate surgery in these groups of children, but sometimes if the parameters are too deranged, if the platelets are too low, if the coagulation profile is too deranged, we may need to place an abdominal drain. And then, as shown in the right photograph, the glove drain is being placed. Although how much successful it is, we do not know. There is no good quality studies which show what is the advantage or what are the indications of the abdominal drain, but still it is being practiced all over the world in various sick children. Otherwise, most of the children should undergo early laparotomy whenever there is a perforation. Bilious vomiting, as I have told you, is a very dangerous. Middle of the night also, we may have to go early upper GI contrast whenever we are suspecting malrotation, because if there is malrotation, corpus cruiparens, whole of the small intestine, midgut can have valvulus and can lead to gangrene of the whole of the intestine. So middle of the night also we do and go for surgery in the high obstruction of the children with the suspicion of malrotation. So to summarize, history, physical examination, plain X-ray, we think about terms of high or the low obstruction, and depending upon the findings, we proceed further in our clinical management. Remember, it is important for us to get hard science. We cannot operate based upon the soft science. So we need certain things which are diagnostic. And good thing about the neonatal distension, neonatal obstruction is that simple plain X-ray is almost diagnostic for almost all of these newborn. If you want to get more about this, you can always read in this my book, The Surgical Disease of Children, which is going to be published in, which is published here, but obviously because of the lockdown, not able to get it printed. It will be available in the markets in near future, in which one of the chapter is there on the approach to a child with neonatal obstruction, common neonatal gastrointestinal GI surgeries, emergencies, how to manage those children. So thank you very much. And now I am open for questions along with Dr. Anil, if there are any. You can always write your question in the chat. If no questions, anything you want to add, Dr. Anil? If no, okay. So again, I want to thank all the attendees again. Any questions? So any questions from any of the attendees?
So there is a tab at the right. There is a questions.
There is a question. It says, I repeat, I'm not seeing any slide by Bharat. So I think most of the other, Dipankar, was you able to see the slide, or was there any problem in the transmission?
So it's clear. Might be it's from the user end.
Okay. So my IT guy says that it may be from the user end only, because most of the other people were able to see the slides. Okay. So there again, are there any other questions? No. If there are no further questions, again, thank you very much. I thank all the audience who have in huge numbers, quite large than our expectation, had attended this webinar. I want to thank them all for their time, and we're always open for questions or further consideration, if any. Dr. Anil. Thank you very much.